This is Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. Here are your hosts, Dr. Tim Slekar and Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, educated educators talking education.
Yeah, it's Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk, educated educators talking education. Saturday, loved Saturdays, 1 full hour, Busted Pencils. Dr. Johnny, producer Jess, how are you both doing? I'm gonna throw it to Jess first. Jess, how are you?
I am doing great, Tim. This is the best way to have a weekend. Busting pencils with some educated educators. It's winter. There's snow on the ground. Sweaters are out. It is good stuff. So happy to be with you, Dr. Johnny Lupinacci. How you doing?
Hey, it's 2025. You know, I am still excited to be in the classroom. I mean, it's a couple weeks now we've had class and the students are going and I love them and they got me going. You know, if you listen on Friday, you heard about our, winter sports passion, at least mine. So it's mid hockey season. It's the ramp up. I say it's mid hockey season just because it's the middle of winter, but it's ramp up to the playoffs for us. And so we have big games all weekend and I love that. So teaching and playing hockey and working with the guys on the ice, it's been busy, but it's been good. And it's great to be here because I love the Saturday time we have together.
Yeah.
And as always, I mean, I love all of our guests, but I'm excited about this guest today, Tim. Let's get him on because
we'll get him on. It's last week it was just Tim, Johnny, and Jess for a whole hour last Saturday, and so we're back. We've got another guest. In fact, he is an education technology strategist, consultant, and one of Canada's leading education strategists with over 20 years of experience in the sector. He's a former teacher, raised by two educators who brings a unique perspective, shaped by his upbringing and extensive work with K-12 administrators and ed tech companies. He is also the host of the Education Matters podcast, where he explores how education impacts individuals and communities. Welcome to Busted Pencils, Jason Buccheri. Jason, how are you, my friend?
Tim, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Was that a little too much energy for you?
The best way for me to describe it is that's American energy. Lots of busting, lots of pencils, lots of excitement, which is
right.
which is fun.
USA.
I've heard that chant a few times in my day. Yeah.
Well, I mean, back. Hey, we are all educated educators talking education when it comes to Busted Pencils. So no borders here. We break down the borders. In fact, as Johnny would say, we bust those borders. We've got listeners in Finland. We got listeners in Germany. And now, man, all of Canada. I cannot wait to see the downloads coming out of, our northernmost. Well, we won't even talk about TFG's ideas with this, but Jason, you have such an interesting background, and I'll put this out. Where do the Busted Pencils guests come from? They come from Tim's online stalking of potential guests, whether that be on the X Twitter, whether that's on the Blue Sky, whether that's on LinkedIn. There are incredible people out there. And Jason, I came across your podcast on LinkedIn, and just said, first of all, the video format that you use is great, but I started looking in and saw a little bit of a opening and think, you know what, this is a person that we want to have on Busted Pencils. And I sent you that little LinkedIn note, and man, right away you came back and you're like, hey, so I'm thinking so you didn't go like, oh my God, who's this weird stalker?
No, I mean it's the beauty of LinkedIn is you're more vetted, right? So I got a quick glimpse into what you're doing and came across Busted Pencils pretty fast. And just to connect this to the earlier idea here, one of the beauties of this and of modern technologies, we connect things across borders. And hopefully we can get into this a bit. But for me, education is the way forward. This is how we can connect different identities, explore different identities, whether that be American, Canadian, or otherwise.
Yeah. Well, so we're going to talk a lot. I mean, this is why I wanted to have you too for our Saturday show, so that we can actually have the time to dig into your, lots of different experiences, and then really talk about also to your podcast, Education Matters. But Jason, your background, you have a blend of teaching, consulting, working with ed tech companies. I mean, tell me how that kind of sets you up to understand K-12 public education. What are some challenges, and where do you see some opportunities?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the question. I mean, it really starts in the classroom. I mean, it starts before that. I grew up on university campus. My father's a university professor, and my mother an elementary school teacher. So whenever I had a PD day, I was either at another elementary school with my mom, or more likely at the university, because that was kind of the cooler place to go and hang out and uh, find the underground arcades they used to have back in the day. But I spent time literally in my dad's Italian lit classrooms, listening to him teach, and getting a lot of attention from all of his students, because I'd be there playing my Game Boy in the back and trying to disrupt the class as much as possible. So education really for me started, as just part of the environment. And then professionally, it started as an elementary school teacher. And I lasted a good year there and realized this is going to be tougher than I thought. So I went back to school, did a master's in literature, and then from there eventually got into higher ed publishing. From higher ed publishing, I worked in K-12. And all these experiences were awesome in that they kind of opened up the world of education to me. I didn't want to, move too far from education. I just thought teaching in the format that, it existed then, and by and large still exists today, was not what I wanted to do. I felt trapped. And so the kind of beauty of what I've been able to do is see classrooms not only across Canada, which I'm not sure if you're aware, your listeners are aware, we don't have a federal body of education. And I know you guys have been talking a lot about that lately. So I might have some insights for you on that if you want to jump into some ideas there. But we don't have a federal body of education. So even our educators, by and large, don't do too much work out of the province, although they do. But in terms of like the ed tech side, the average teacher doesn't really understand what's happening across the country. So I've had this unique perspective, and the podcast has been a way to share it with the community that I've been involved in for years now.
Johnny.
Well, man, I love it, Jason, and a big fan of the podcast. Tim kicked it over to me, got to listen, and I said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna have a blast with this guy." So I appreciate you being here and love that backstory for you. And in particular, kind of themed through what you're sharing and talking about related to the podcast and, this broad idea. I'd like to ask you, you kind of explore how education shapes society and democracy and those kinds of things. And so I'd like to ask you a little bit about, can you share a little bit of your vision of what's education's role in society? Like, kind of how do you come at it and see it?
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, to me, it's the bedrock. It's the bedrock of when we're talking about a society, we're talking about our kind of societies, right? Democratic societies. And so for me, really from the onset, and the way I started my entire podcast series was really starting with my father. I wanted to start authentic, and he was the one who's influenced me the most. And for him, the entire purpose of education is for civic ends, is to not only have an educated and engaged populace, but one that understands what human flourishing is, what the value of human life is, and that we have responsibility to our neighbors and to our brothers and sisters. So that's really the sort of impetus for the podcast.
Man, well, you just said too, what we always point out here at Busted Pencils, our neighbors. We're trying to get our neighbors to listen and taking care of our neighbors. Hey, if you're a neighbor too, 608-557-8577. That's the number for the Busted Pencils mailbag. Also, the text only line, 855-752-4842. That way you can send us your text message. And yeah, if you want to know what it's like up north, 608-557-8577. I know some people in Wisconsin, our regular Wisconsin listeners, are like, it's not any colder up there than it is here in the winter. Jess, what do you say?
We're at single digits right now, so And that's Fahrenheit, single digits Fahrenheit. Before we came on, we had a little chat, a little joke about Canadian measuring systems.
Well,
Right.
really, the rest of the world's measuring system.
Well, I don't know about that. Jason shared a graphic with me about apparently Canada uses all the measuring systems, and it really
Nice.
depends on specifically what you're measuring. I learned that they get really nitty gritty about temperature. That specifically for a pool, there you'll use Fahrenheit, but when it's outdoors, then you use Celsius. Is that right?
It just makes sense. Trust me. You just have to Google Canadian flow chart temperature.
I love it. I love it.
Oh man. Well, Jason, so the transition and when we met and we had a kind of a pre-interview and talked about this, you said, you starting in elementary school, that was our common connection. I said, I was a second grade teacher, and it was just like, whoa. What is it that for you, you'd said there was something there that you felt like it was that moment to say, I want to do something different. And was it the ed tech first, or was it just the sense of saying, I know education is my calling, but there's a different way around or how I want to enter? Give you a little, just, kind of briefly there for about a minute or so.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I would say that the four walls felt real tight. I was isolated. I had, first year teachers at elementary school. Tim, I'm sure you know well how overwhelming that is in terms of understanding, the entire flow to a year. But for me, it felt like there was a better way to influence more people. And so the ed tech side kind of stumbled into it that way, as a way to stay close to education and find a way to continue to support. So for me, it was a way to get beyond those classroom walls and explore what education looked like outside of the classroom.
Our guest this Saturday is Jason Buccheri. Check out his podcast. We're going to talk more about that. Education Matters. We'll have all of that in the description so that people can get that when you download the podcast. Remember, the Busted Pencils mailbag, 608-557-8577. We want to hear what you're thinking out there. When we get back, Jason, too, want to ask you this question and let you think on it during the commercial. Is ed tech a tool or a cultural transition that we need to adapt to? More specifically, artificial intelligence. Busted Pencils, back after the break. It's not too much Busted Pencils ever. It's Busted Pencils fully leaded education talk. Educated educators talking education. Our guest, Jason Buccheri. Yeah, from Canada. Yes, we said Busted Pencils. We go wherever the most awesome people are. And then we, beg them to come on our show. And get,
Who's this we?
I don't know. It's I got to put a little bit of it on you because I don't want to be the one kind of creepy guy out there. So we are back. We're talking everything. Jason, you've had such an incredible past in bringing all these things together. Ed tech, and I left the last segment by kind of setting up AI. But before I get into AI, though, too, I wanted to just talk about this because I think this will help lead us in. You've been working with ed tech and school districts and partnerships very specifically, and helping those partnerships get off the ground, or even potentially sometimes too to see some of the things like, whoa, not doing this, because I hear this all the time with ed tech is that how do we enter into some really great partnerships, whether it be with an ed tech company, whether it's with an ed tech distributor. Give us a little sense of that world, and then we'll kind of pivot to the current realities of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I'd love to. So So first and foremost, it's a complicated dynamic, right? Like there are a ton of amazing ed tech companies and resources out there really in it for the right reasons, really trying to, better the same kind of mission I talked about in the first segment about, forwarding and expanding education to help people understand what are the things that really matter and how we make a better society. But they're also pressed upon by having to essentially survive. I mean, a lot of startups are out there and they go month to month trying to make payroll. So it's a complicated industry because then on the other side, you have school districts that need a lot of help, need a lot of outside partners, recognize this, but it's complicated. So I would say, the best piece of advice I could give and the best kind of structure would be to kind of quote one of the guests I just had on recently, Dr. Jordan Tinney, who is a retired superintendent out of British Columbia, and he was head of the Surrey School District, which is the biggest in British Columbia for a long time. And his advice for ed tech companies, and I think which is the right approach and is how I've always approached my work, is you got to lead with the relationships first. You have to understand the people that are operating the system, the needs that they have, and really take the time to cultivate that relationship piece. The other part that he identified was that he hated this idea, and so do I, quite frankly, of an ed tech company coming to a school district and saying, "I'm going to solve your problems," or "We're going to make life easier." That's just a wrong-headed approach. First of all, you're approaching the experts in education, and it's always more complicated than you think, right? So his advice was, how are you making or approach districts and help them understand how you are making the work more rewarding for teachers, more rewarding for students. And once you have that, he said, everybody will work towards it because it's a complicated piece to implement a new piece of technology, whether it be for literacy, for math, even a student information system, right? So how do you make everyone's life more rewarding? How do you keep pulling everybody towards that goal of helping education expand?
Johnny, I know jump in there, man. I got tongue tied there for a second.
Well, yeah, Tim, I love it. I love this idea of like what's the relationship between technology that helps learners, helps teachers, and we're part of a technological society in this particular moment that is in the midst of major change. I mean, the technology is changing. It's developing faster. I mean, I don't even want to say faster because technology is always developed incredibly fast. But this new technology, primarily AI, right? It is developing so quickly and it is changing the landscape of labor, of work, and that includes teaching and learning. And we've gone back and forth, Tim, like we've kicked it around and teased the Tim being a regular parishioner at the Church of AI and me being kind of that bad Catholic about it. I'm like, yeah. Like, I mean, I get AI and technology. I'm not a Luddite, but at the same time, I'm like, let me go head to head with it any day. Like I can write faster. I can make good lesson plans. I can teach.
Not for long, Johnny.
But Jason, I was going to say, what I've learned in the last, 8 months, especially since, Tim and I have been looking at it more closely and we've been taking workshops on how to teach with AI, how to learn with AI, what are the roles that it has in classrooms. It's really transformed me. And I think it's made me a better teacher. And those are tools that I really like. We talk a lot about music and we've talked about on this show, Jason, like the drum machine came out and did it eliminate drummers? No, but your job was on the line if you were a really crappy drummer. So there was a lot of creative stuff that happened because of the drum machine. There were a lot of great drummers that developed even better chops. And so I feel similar to that in teaching. So, I'm really interested in hearing Jason's working with ed tech and AI and, your thoughts on its impact, not only on society, but especially on teaching and learning.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to be a real good Canadian here, and I'm going to sit right on the fence between the two of you. Okay. And that's not for lack of an opinion one way or the other, but just the disposition that I think you need to have. So first and foremost, before we say it's good or bad, one thing to me is abundantly clear, and that's, you have to study it. So this is also a very Canadian and in particular Torontonian study. So the work of Marshall McLuhan is absolutely central here to this. And Marshall McLuhan, for probably a younger generation that might be listening to this, might not be aware, is like one of the most famous communication theorists on planet Earth. Like, he's in Annie Hall, he's in a Woody Allen movie, right? So how did he get there is a story in itself, but essentially wrote a book called Understanding Media. And so what I would propose is that you have to understand the technology first. So educators are great at this, exploring, learning. And so I think there's amazing opportunities for pedagogy. I think there are a lot of ethical concerns that we need to have, but I think the way we get at it is by starting to study it. And that in itself can be some great pedagogy right there.
Well, yeah, and so studying it too. Yeah, Johnny, you're like in the text or text messages back and forth with each other. I love this. Study it. Yeah, the idea here, and Jason, your connection too to recognizing the professionalism and the curiosity that teachers can bring to these platforms, and whether it's, you know, again, whether it's an ed tech software or now here AI, as AI is coming forward, you know, what do teachers think? How do they see this? How do they use this opportunity to engage even to it with each other? And I think that's what's really happened too, is maybe Johnny and I are modeling, you know, a conversation. We said maybe 8 months ago, we started out kind of like, oh, I love this. And Johnny was like, Tim, back off. But, you know, we've both been engaging with it. And I do see, as you said, there are some real places where, guess what? It is not going to make learning better. It actually can interrupt learning in different spaces. And you know what? We're having a great conversation with Jason Buccheri. We're going to keep going on this because there's more to go on AI. It's Busted Pencils. Hey, we're going to come back. See you in a minute.
All right, we're back. This is Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. Educated educators talking education. Cross the borders today. We're here with our guy, Jason Buccheri, great Canadian guy. Love chatting with him. And he has a podcast, Education Matters, that, you know, Tim and I are big fans of, and we got to connect with them. And we have him here for you listeners on a Saturday. So this is exciting stuff. I want to jump right back into it because in the last segment, Jason name dropped, a Canadian philosopher, I'll say, a great thinker of the world, Marshall McLuhan. And I remember reading him as a young punk rock grad student, eager to change things, really excited about media and, you know, all kinds of alternate pedagogies and different ways that, you know, we were learning by means of interacting with everything around us, especially pop culture media. And I read the book, the medium is the message, right? And man, he took me back to grad school and some amazing conversations around this stuff, especially nudging us to study technology in terms of, instead of, you know, like Tim and I banter back and forth. Of course, yeah, we're both studying it, you know, but we like to argue about, you know, is AI a tool or is AI a whole cultural shift? You know, and we're like, well, it's both. And I'm like, get it out of our classrooms. And Tim's like, too bad that's not a possibility. Bring it into the classrooms, make them stronger. And I said, well, yeah, that's just describing an educational tool. And, you know, Jason's here dropping theory about it, telling us to study it and reminding our listeners to slow down and study. I love that. But Jason, I got to ask you before I take up any more time, man, expand on that a little bit because boom, mind blown. Marshall McLuhan studying in relationship to AI in the moment we're in.
Yes, I think one of the real important things when it comes to studying technology that McLuhan identified is part of the McLuhan method is don't ask if it's good or bad. That immediately blinds you from its effects. So that's the key. That's the key with Marshall. You want to study the effects. Now, I've listened to some of your other other interviews, and I know you had Iron talking a little bit about some of McLuhan's students, in particular, Neil Postman, who takes the opposite view, said like you have to value it, and they're both important approaches. But with Marshall is in particular relevant to AI right now, because we don't want to ask if it's good or bad. We want to look at the tsunami of effects. So I think another author that's useful to help you understand this is taking that approach and looking at the entire history is Yuval Noah Harari, and he looks at AI not as a tool, and I think it's a great mistake as a tool, as an agent, because AI is fundamentally different. And by agent, he means something that can act without human direction, and that's fundamentally different. And now we can ask the question, what's the impact on societies? What's the impact on education, right? But we have to start, I think, with that fundamental understanding in the very least.
Yeah. So, and Johnny, that's what I mean when I'm trying to push on you that it's not a tool. Thank you, Jason, I'm not saying you took my side, but helping me I'm not good at making the point the way you just did right there, which is to kind of lay that out and talk about the fact that, there's something different here. When we're talking about artificial intelligence. Yes, it's technology. Yes, it's ed tech. Yes, it's got tooling types of functions that we can apply to it. But that, to me, has always been limiting. Then by classifying it as a tool, it's limiting then what it can, go ahead, Jason, could do.
No, I just want to jump in because now I'm going to be the good Canadian, sit on the fence again, and get a couple shots in for Johnny. At the same time, there is a history of the implementation of tools, of tech, right? I think that Johnny would point to. It's like we've also seen part of this history before. Who controls it, right? Who impacts it? Who does it benefit? Who doesn't it benefit? So there is this history of technology that we should be aware of and we should bring to the conversation. The way I like to do it is in this idea of an ecology, right? McLuhan, Postman, Eric McLuhan talked about a media ecology, an environment of media, and that's how they should be studied and understood.
Yeah, I love that metaphor of an ecology, thinking about, all the things as they interact with each other. And Jason, I love your nudge to both Tim and I, the effects. What's happening, the effects, because I would tell Tim, man, AI is producing a ton of garbage music, a ton of garbage stuff, and then really quickly start to see it improve because iron sharpens iron. And so the human interaction with AI, the more teachers we're working with the technology to say, here's good teaching, here are some ways to differentiate, here are some really important things to understand about different learners, about learners who are speaking a second language in the class, like all these criterias that we're seeing it help and really bring a change and a shift. I would say a much needed assistance to the labor of being in a classroom. And it's not eliminating great teaching. It's helping great teachers do great teaching. It's really becoming, I think, a really powerful, I don't even know what to call it. I would say you got a left hand, you got a right hand, and then you have the technology that helps give you 4 more hands now in the classroom. So I'm a big fan of us studying it. Love this, Jason. I don't think it's a hard turn, but we only have so much time with you. So I want to get back to education matters because it's related, right? Having dialogue and conversation about these issues, about the important relationship between education and society. And man, I'm a big fan. I mean, you touch on like the way that neoliberalism is pervasive in education, and you don't shy away from the politics of this. I mean, you dive in. So tell us a little bit more about the show and some of the things that you're excited about, as you're having these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, Education Matters was really born out of my experience in education across, I want to say certainly North America, right? Like it was really born from this idea that I've been privileged to see education not only across Canada. Like I've been to LAUSD, I've been to Miami-Dade, I've been to Chicago public schools in my work. And I felt that the conversation surrounding education in the media, in public discourse, even and again, I say this in my intro, even amongst educators themselves, it really deteriorated. So it would, made me motivated to get out there and start the podcast to not only share the ideas, my ideas, because it's really not about me. It's about my guests. It's about the people I've had the privilege of learning from. So, like I mentioned earlier, I started with my father. My mom refused to do an interview with me. She's the much more private person. But also, some of my early educators. I had my rugby coach who ended up being a superintendent of education in my former district. So we had this wonderful conversation about masculinity, sports, and then what it's like to lead a district the size that he led. And then all of the superintendents I've had the pleasure of meeting and how difficult their job is. Right. I often joke that my view of education was kind of imbued by, Superintendent Chalmers and The Simpsons. I always thought those guys were just out to lunch and they were just there in the way of education. But I found the opposite to be true, even in the US. They're very committed, very smart individuals that have a next to impossible job. So, in the end, the podcast is an attempt to share these stories, share these folks, hopefully motivate other educators. The audience is really intended to be, a group of educators or those really passionate about learning about education. And so, I think the work that you're doing and I'm trying to do in Education Matters is really important work.
Yeah, see, and that's it. It's these multiple ways of having these conversations, as you said. And so, Jason, what you saw is very much too what I saw, 10, 15 years ago when I even did my first volunteering on local conservative talk radio was to introduce, and again, not a to bash on any one political side, but to
Mm.
try to introduce the conversation around education that I think 80 to 90% of the people mostly agree if you
Mhm.
sat them down and would go, yeah, that makes sense because they're talking about what's best for my kid, what's best for my community. When we have those conversations, you say it becomes conversations with our neighbors, and so teachers don't become the scapegoat or the bad person, and superintendents and our neighbors who might have some concerns about what they're hearing about what's going on in the classroom. We can enter into conversations with those
Yeah. Yeah,
people.
and it's a
And
place to practice conversations that you disagree on. So like I know it's very contentious right now with American politics, but what we should be focusing on how to have these conversations. Like it's never worth losing a family member because they voted for
Mm,
somebody else. Like this is your
yep.
family, these are your friends, these are your community, right? So to me, education is the place, is the locale where you practice these conversations. You learn to disagree, you learn to take the other person's side. And I think the path forward is only through education.
Well, that one too, you just made me think about that is that, one of the things that Johnny and I have been pointing out here, as you said, the past election here, and, oh my goodness, all the things that are implied there. But what we, have pointed out, and a lot of people have helped us see is there is this, to me, what sounds like there's way more common ground on public education, particularly here.
Mm.
We know that in our most rural counties in America, that when given the choice here in America to quote give their taxpayer monies to private schools, they overwhelmingly said no.
Mhm.
And that same group of people, though, also voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump.
Mhm.
And so, you know, some people are like, well, so that right there is a deal breaker. I can't talk to them. It's like, no, 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 no. There's a conversation right there waiting because these are our people who do see value in public schools and don't want to give this up. And so, actually, what I'm trying to do is take the conversation that I believe has been hijacked away from us to be able to have with our neighbors, with people who disagree, and they've been told that we're not allowed to have these conversations with each other.
Mhm.
Speaking of conversation, I got to remind everybody 608-557-8577. If you're one of our neighbors out there, give us a call. Let us know what you're thinking about. If you're hearing this for the first time and wondering, um, you know, would Tim and Johnny actually talk to me because I think I disagree with them? Of course we would. 608-557-8577. That's the mailbag line. And also, don't forget about the text line 855-752-4842. our guest on this awesome Saturday, Jason Buccheri. Yeah, from across the border up there in Canada, truly enjoying the weather. Jess found out too that depending on if you're going to get into a warm pool, you want to know it in Celsius. If you're getting into a cold
Fahrenheit.
or Fahrenheit, I'm sorry,
It doesn't matter the temperature of the pool, Tim. As long as you're measuring
It's
pool
just that it's a
temperature.
pool.
Johnny, you got a
Who's
little bit
measuring
more
the
there.
temperature? Who's measuring the temperature of the pool in January, Tim?
There are indoor pools.
Oh yeah, true. Oh, that's right. You got temperature also exists inside.
Johnny's a
Sometimes.
hockey player. He's ready to skate on that pool.
Yeah, I just want it frozen or emptied so I can skateboard in it. Hey, Jason, I mean, inspiring stuff. Love being able to have this conversation with you. Excited for our listeners, to get to meet you and to have more. Where can they get more, Jason? Where can they listen to Education Matters and learn more about your work?
Yeah, Apple, Spotify, the Education Matters podcast is the best place for sure. And then feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or on socials, the Education Matters podcast.
Awesome.
Getting it there, and yeah, listener too, we'll make sure that all of that particularly are in the show notes for when this drops as a podcast. That way everybody can get in touch. And Jason, it's just, yeah, it's so nice to have a conversation. I think that's it. And so, when I see other educators out there who are having these moments, podcasts, newsletters, things like that, and we joke and say it's like Tim stalking. No, I'm just trying to find so many people out there who want to have conversations and then demonstrate. So, Jason, we are so glad that you were able to stop by and bust some pencils with us. So thank you, my friend.
Pleasure's all mine, folks. Thanks so much. And just a parting note to my American friends out there. The way forward is through the work and through the relationships and the discussions.
That's right. Beautiful. Tim and Johnny breaking it down when we get back. There it is. It's Busted Pencils. Fully leaded education talk. Educated educators talking education Saturday. Love being with you all on Saturday out there. Great guest, Jason Buccheri, his podcast, Education Matters, across the border in Canada, not our 51st state. They are still their own.
Oh my God.
Have it
Well,
back on to talk about
You,
that.
Tim, was going to try and work that in somewhere.
Hey, I'm just saying, like, I'm looking at Canada when these conversations come up and go, oh my God, please reject any thought of that, because
I don't think
still
you have to
hold
worry
out.
about too many Canadians taking that seriously. I mean, I spend a good fair amount of time north of the border with our Canadian friends, and just to say the least about it, they are not eager
Right.
to join what currently is, I'll say, the dumpster fire of American politics right now. The ultimate low moment in modern democracy here in the U.S., and so they're not chomping at the bit to be part of that, and I don't blame them.
No, but
What a
great.
show today, Tim.
Yeah, go ahead, Johnny.
Holy
I mean,
smokes.
great guess, right?
Yeah, Jason, Buccheri from up there, Education Matters. I loved having a chat with him. Hopefully we'll have more chats, but I love that the whole way that he was he kept saying, I'll be a good Canadian, I'll stay on the fence. But what he was sharing too, is he was teaching that was a great segue into him saying, we have to study this and we have to have all the voices come together. We have to, I think he said a media ecology, right? A dialogue that disagrees. And we talk about that, Tim, all the time about how, we spend way too much time, not only in education, but especially in matters of democracy more broadly, whether it's debates about healthcare or, sadly, debates about human rights. We shouldn't even be saying a sentence like that in 2025, that there are debates about human rights. But, we're in the midst of that. But any good, healthy, strong democracy is rife with debate. It's just being able to do that and hold space for reaching what we call in democracy common ground, right? A better good for all people to live together. So love that nudge from our guy Jason today. Listeners, if you want to drop a question or join the conversation in some capacity, you can call or text us for the mailbag at 608-557-8577. That's 608-557-8577. Or if you're listening right now, feel free to text at 855-752-4842. But Tim, man, I know you enjoyed that conversation.
I loved it. And Jess, right here, I don't want to steal this. What you had a comment?
As I was just listening and taking notes, as I do on my side of this whole production, I was so entranced and appreciative of this idea of the concept of ecology, a media ecology and conversation, because those are things that take multiple parties interacting, multiple parties that have their own ideas and ideals that come and grow together, that education is the place where that happens. And the way that we get there is with conversation, with having these talks and sharing what's important to us. It was very fulfilling.
Yeah, like I said, and I knew when Jason said ecology, that would get Johnny going, because that's right up that
A different kind of ecology, but
yeah, I know, but I just in the way just too talks, because it becomes a system conversation, and that realizing that when we're talking about systems, is that there's complexity, there's give and take, there's nuances, there's different ways that things interact with other things. There's loss, there's gains. It's complex, and that we're our best in democracies are best when we dig in and realize that our public schools are the best when they're engaging in the complex ecology of what's going on with learning, whether that's learning academics or learning to be in a democracy. There's depth there. Johnny, I see you nodding your head there. I think I got some agreement from you.
Yeah, and I like that. One of the things that was a special highlight of having Jason on the show is we got to talk shop, and he shared some great thinkers and talked about relationships, learning relationships that we can all be present in, having conversations about things, thinking about the way that we need to study new technologies, and reminding us that new technologies, one lens to look at it, right, is to not say, is this good or bad, but to, take a pause on it and have a study of it, have a deliberation, have different ideas. That's going to expose both strengths and challenges to any implementation, to any role technologies can play in our classroom, especially regarding AI. And I love that nudge. Some of the greatest thinkers in the world have talked about that. And I think it's really important.
Yeah, man, great show. But you know what, Johnny? Now it's time for our moment of Zen. Education becomes most rich and alive when it confronts the reality of moral conflict in the world. Thanks everybody for busting pencils with us on a Saturday. Again, shout out to Jason Buccheri, great guest. Check out his podcast, the Education Matters podcast, Spotify, Apple. It's not even Apple iTunes anymore. Apple Podcasts, you can get it there. And then too, we'll have it in the show description. Johnny, we got some great shows coming up. Again, we love everybody hanging out, Busted Pencils. We're going to have our homeroom, of course, coming up. Classes in session coming up this Wednesday. Aditya Nagrath, Math Anxiety. I know that one all too well because, man, I've got a ton of math anxiety. And to give you a little hint, we had a little meeting with Aditya, and it's like, okay, this guy is going to help me maybe at age 57 drop a little bit of my math anxiety. But yeah, hang out, and then yeah, of course on Friday, first or face-offs, free throws, face-offs. It's winter sports, all of those great things that are out there that we love to do. Yeah, and make sure you come back though too on Monday. Homeroom, always love seeing you guys in the morning. It's Busted Pencils. It's fully leaded. See you next week.